I hope everyone can hear me. Okay, so let's just return to the first slide. Masini pagbuk na merit sa ayo, pagayo, padipadiyangay ay na adasugan isiye pagpag mapulod. Well, the meaning of that is in the next slide. It's quite long in Tau-Buhid, but it basically means, good afternoon and thank you for your presence. But I like the Filipino version because it's more detailed. It says, magandang tanghali sa inyong lahat. Maraming salamat sa inyong pagdalo sa pagtitipong ito. So culturally, it is a meeting, it is a gathering, and we are gathering to celebrate an occasion of success, of triumph, but we have to understand also that there are many crucial events before we reach the point where we are right now. As an ethnographer, one important thing I learned among the highland Tau-Buhid is the value of reciprocity. My students understand I always emphasize the value of reciprocity. Their reciprocity is a moral system by which all good relationships may be established upon. In a sense, in the next slide we will see, reciprocity is justice. What is the implication if we see reciprocity as justice? Seeing reciprocity as a form of justice helps me personally to understand the importance of words, justice and words and justice. Because among the Tau-Buhid, words are only pronounced when one intends something. Thus, words command and order nature. Words destroy an enemy. And words, among other things, in the Tau-Buhid cultural life, heal maladies. So one must not speak from the heart when one does not intend it, because when one do that, one will eventually create injustice. Following such a moral logic, let me speak from my heart to thank you for making this intellectual gathering a reality, and let me repay your kindnesses through a wish. To my friends, students, colleagues, University of the Philippines, Los Baños officials, visitors, to my superiors, to the University of the Philippines, Los Baños Chancellor, Dr. Jose B. Camacho Jr., his Vice Chancellors, especially to Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, Dr. Jean O. Loyola, to the College of Human Ecology Dean, Dr. Ricardo M. Sandalo, to Human and Family Development Studies Department Chair, my superior, immediate superiors, Dr. Rupohil Z. Albor, and his staff and faculty members. To the UPLB Office for Institutional Development in Higher Education Director, Dr. Greg Tabios Pawile, Your Majesty. To my family, my parents, Teresita and Virgilio, represented by my sister, Attorney Christine Heidi A. Rosales. To the Ugnayang Pang-Agham Tau members, officials, elders, and our President, Professor Estil de la Bastilla. To the Philippine Social Science Council delegation, Dr. Excelsa C. Thompson, Dr. Lourdes M. Portus, Ms. Karen Barrios, and to the one whom this prestigious ceremony is named after, Dr. Virginia A. Miralao. Kufageton nangus tam araw at palad, tagpon ayo na masinituwa ay pakamulon. May the blessings of the universe be upon you. So that is the translation. Hiling ko na nawa ay pagpalain kayo ng mga espiritu ng kalikasan kung malinis ang inyong puso. So you see, in the Tau-Buhid context, there is a prerequisite. The burden lies on the one who receives the blessing. So it's up to receive the blessing or to reject it. Our collective happiness would not be possible, of course, without the help of people behind everything. So I thank Dr. Frederick Lagrand, who congratulated me last night through email from Paris at France, his son Anton Lagrand, Dr. Cherubim Kison, and Dr. Thomas Gibson, a prominent scholar on the Mangan research, who critiqued many crucial aspects of my article. And most of all, I thank the overall Tau-Buhid Pupuanga chief, Fausto Noveloso, and the entire Tau-Buhid community, which you'll see in the next slide. Okay, so the one on your right is the chief of the Tau-Buhid, not the one on the left. Okay. That was me when I was doing my fieldwork. So you see, it's totally different from what I look now from what I used to look like. Okay. My article is one among the collection of articles in the journal Anthropozoologica, which you'll find in the next slide, published by the French National Museum of Natural History in Paris, France. Here you will find the works of prominent multi-species scholars like Paul Silito and Frederick Lagrand and others. The discussion of the articles revolved around pigs in ritual and cultural context. You may download the entire volume through the website of the French National Museum of Natural History, and this is open access. This is free for you to download. But these articles, if you read this, but these articles, including my article, is a story of the people. My article is a story of the Tau-Buhid of Mindoro. In the next slide. These are the masses where most highland Tau-Buhid reside. They have specific names for the mountains. There are clear delineation of the places for humans and those believed inhabited by more than human beings. So this is a technical term we use when we refer to beings that exist outside the sphere of humanity, the more than human beings. Many of the things found in these regions, such as soil, herbs, stones, rocks, crystals, vines, bones, and many others, serve a specific ingredient for effective use of magic. Magic is central to the Tau-Buhid life. In fact, children, especially boys, are trained in magic. But let me be clear about this, so that we would not exoticize what we mean by magic and magic as used by the Tau-Buhid. Because magic for the Tau-Buhid is not purely spiritual, but serves as a moral guide on how to live with other members of the community. Thus, casting sorcery spells, which is practiced in the highland regions, there are many communities there. When there is a transgression, what is considered as a good action, they practice magic. So good deeds for the highland Tau-Buhid are always those that follow the value of reciprocity. Basically, reciprocity could be understood as taking only from others what one can repay later on. Do not take too much when you cannot consume it and return something. An abuse of kindness is therefore a cause for and of sorcery. What you can see is the protected area governed by the Philippine state through the Department of Environment and Natural Resources through its agencies in Mindoro, the Protected Areas Management Office, and co-managed by the Tamaraw Conservation Program, because this is where the majority of the Tamaraw population could be found, but there are also presences in other areas in Mindoro. So with regards to methodology, I want you to imagine how I gathered my data. I gathered it through field work. Actually, I have been doing field work with the Tau-Buhid since 2016. Now that I am teaching, I am doing it intermittently. UP is very understanding about the gifts, skills, and passion of their faculty members, that we are allowed to do our research in a manner that would not conflict with our official function like teaching. And I am very thankful to UPLB. Participant observation has been so helpful in many of my ethnographic works. It puts context to many difficult complex cultural data which I use in my narrative. Upon the publication of the article, I went to the Punong tribu to show it, and he commented in Pang-Agham, "Katayo'y Tau-Buhid tagbanwan sis Mindoro at ngay pakamulon." He is simply wanting to assure that I was not writing about a specific species found in their community, but about the people who own such species of whether plants, animals, or whatever. What he said in Tau-Buhid is evident of the Tau-Buhid consciousness about the entry of parties like non-government organizations, state agents, and para-state agents who are interested in the aspects of the Tau-Buhid natural environment. Many organizations enter Tau-Buhid communities with one particular aim: science. Science is the aim. On the next slide. The Punong tribu said that from bats to rats to frogs to shrimps to deer, and of course to the Tamaraw, all are interested to understand these without having regard to how the Tau-Buhid communities are affected by external or science-based activities. But the problem of the Tau-Buhid with outsiders is not unique, but one that is also experienced by many indigenous, including local communities in other parts of the world, like in the Latin America, especially on the issue of land tenure. Among ethnic communities belonging to the Mangyan ethno-linguistic groups, my students are familiar with the different groups of Mangyan in Mindoro, which was mentioned a while ago. The Alangan, the Buhid, the Tau-Buhid, the community where I'm working with and among, the Iraya, the Ratagnon, and the Hanunuo, which is highly ethnographically studied by Conklin. The Tau-Buhid, however, are the least ones who have been securing their ancestral domain. These problems I discussed in my other piece in the territories of fire, which you can see on the next slide. It is also open access, and it may be downloaded for free should you like to read it. So, the pigs, as the central theme of my article, is a backdrop of an indigenous cultural system which reinforces alterity. In the case of the highland Tau-Buhid, being different is power. As a backdrop, it challenges our conception of order. I would like to emphasize that order which are both legal and scientific. So if you read the article, I'm particularly critiquing 2 or 3 laws in the Philippines. One is the Expanded National Integrated Protected Areas System Act of 2018, the Wildlife Resource Conservation Protection Act, and the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act. Legal, because as the Tau-Buhid case shows, on the next slide you'll see that, elevation of a previously autonomous indigenous frontier to a legal status, such as creating a protected area, changes the life world which communities is accustomed to living since time immemorial. They are forced to adapt to an alien social order if they are to survive as a people, but in exchange of leaving behind their lives. Imagine the genocide, whether intentional or not. Again, I expound more on this idea in my other piece, The Territories of Fire. But the new order brought about by legality is not enough in Mounts Iglit, but rather is strengthened more by its scientific justification. So it is also about time to reflect on the power of science, or in the words of Laura Nanger, the big science, or science with the big S. What do we mean by science? And how can science be a tool to understand diversity of sciences or diverse sciences? Forms of interrogation and the implication of pure science project involving indigenous communities have recently commenced through decolonization and efforts in articulating how indigenous communities use their indigenous knowledge in shaping their environments. So as you see, colleagues and friends and students, in the article, combined law and science, when it encroaches upon an indigenous community, could be totally disastrous. As Tanya Lee has pointed out, the anthropologist Tanya Lee has pointed out, local realities are more complex than policy models suggest. Any legal system, policy, or broadly based program will encounter a range of local conditions and unique dilemmas in its implementation. Close application. This is the reason why the article interrogates these two variables, law and science, and along the narrative proposes a new way of looking at reality. Reality in its present construction is bound by time and space. But can we conceive reality beyond the grasp of the 5 empirical senses? If reality is conceived this way, what social order can be created? The article, through the Tau-Buhid narrative, speaks of this kind of reality, a reality that is not bound by the 5 empirical senses, yet sensible also to the use of the 5 empirical senses. A reality where existence of what could be considered real is not bound by time and space alone, but by the conditions to which specific reality could exist. The pigs in the article bring this notion into practice through a ritual. Through the pigs, highland Tau-Buhid transform hunting from more than just a way to procure meat from game animals to a ritual which reinforces understanding about their cosmology as a people, which you can find on the next slide. What you can see is the basic cosmology of the Tau-Buhid. In the Tau-Buhid, it would be a surprise or an exotic thing to know without much anthropological understanding, to know that to them, the moon rises in the west. How could the moon rise from the west? But there is an intricate explanation about that which I wrote in the article. The main point is to show you that there is another science of ordering the world, and the Tau-Buhid shows that ordering in the way they conduct their rituals. This is the reason I describe their ritual practice as ritual-hunting. If you notice that, yes, it is really hyphenated to signal to my readers that such is a hybrid terminology. During the copy editing stage, I would like to share this with you. I was flagged by the editor about this, the hyphenation of ritual-hunting. So it's not hunting ritual, but it's actually ritual hunting. Because to the copy editor, I might deviate from the Anglo-Saxon grammatical rules, but I defended it with reason that I mentioned, because ritual-hunting is provisional. What do I mean by this? I invite other scholars to contribute to the discussion that hunting is not just for the procurement of meat among indigenous communities, but much more than that, like the Tau-Buhid, a total grand celebration of their cosmology. Some early scholars in the Tau-Buhid, like Douglas Pennoyer, for example, tried to describe it, but I could not find him using the term. In other words, it is my attempt to put into a single concept a complex ritual practice of the Tau-Buhid, which for state agents is simply just a procurement of meat. Simply put, for policymakers who are not well versed in the ethnographic meaning of hunting, you'll see on the next slide, hunting might be seen only as an economic activity which could be replaced with something, quote unquote, less harmful. But as I explained in the article, it is not the case. The two things you'll see there are pictures from one event called the Sapong. Sapong is a circular burning or circular ignition, and they trap animals there. But that is not easy because again, there are ritual requirements in order to do that. Sadly, let me just share it with you. I was told by my informant that last year, the Sapong was initiated by the state agents without consulting the indigenous communities. And so last year, there was no ritual hunting. And imagine you students, if you are so eager to attend to a party, and then later on you found out the party is already over, what would you feel? I want you to feel that way. So hunting will continue on the premise that it is a ritual of mediation which happens through pig sacrifices. If you notice, there are two kinds of pigs mentioned. One is the wild pigs, the other domesticated pigs. The domesticated pigs are those that can be used in ritual sacrifices. The wild pigs, on the other hand, are conceived more as agentic beings or conscious beings. Or conscious beings because they are spirit in flesh, while the domesticated pigs are spiritless, hence they are for ritual offerings. They are the exchange for the gifts of nature or spirits. But what do these imply? The domesticated pigs procured from the lowlanders signify a collective memory of polarization. The stigma brought about by domesticating pigs in the highlands, for fear that state agents and allied parasite agents would apprehend them, because for the state, domesticated pigs might contaminate the Warty population, so they are not allowed to domesticate their pigs in the highland, all because conservation is wanted to preserve and conserve the purity of the Warty pigs population. To mitigate the issue, highlanders procure pigs from lowlanders. The lack of the spirit or agency of domesticated pigs, however, mirrors how the Tau-Buhid see themselves. They use their being other alterity as power against the conquering nature of the lowlanders. It is akin to seeing an enemy as inferior. In the Tau-Buhid context shared with Buhid, in the words of Thomas Gibson, spirit loss could be a cause for maladies. That's why they put a garment over here, in order to prevent the spirit from escaping. So it's like that. Again, it's ontological, okay? In other words, a spiritless entity, such as domesticated pigs, are a conduit for connecting the human realm to the spirit realm. Thus, during sacrificial rituals, the squealing of pigs, as Labrand also notes among the Ibaloy as a comparative way of understanding this, is important because through such means, spirits or ancestors are conjured with the blood, as Gibson also notes among the Buhid, serve as vitality offered to the spirits. So two things are important: the squealing of pigs and the blood of pigs, because they are the only potent elements by which the ancestors or the spirits of the ancestors can be conjured. Do not take this literally. So how do we make sense of this? I was asked oftentimes, even from among anthropologists, if it was true. That's their question. Christians, is this true? Did you just make it up? Something like that. And I was amazed at how people, especially some of our colleagues in the discipline, would still resort to ontogeny or origin of what is scientifically true. Why? My answer has been this all the time. Our duty as social scientists is not to validate or invalidate the truth, but to understand how truth is constructed among indigenous and local communities and how such truth construction puts order in a community. Seeing it this way leads me to problematize multi-species, the current paradigm which I challenge in the paper. At the basic level, multi-species paradigm seeks to understand human relationship with other biological beings and how such multi-species relationship reorganizes the world, like the virus that caused COVID-19 and our personal and collective lives as humans. Throughout, I argue in the article, which you'll find on the next slide, that the Tau-Buhid's relationship with domesticated pigs is reflective of a political struggle to maintain their sociality while negotiating relationship with the lowlands. This is where ritual hunting happens. This is called sagrado, an exonym, which means it's a name attributed by the outsiders in attempt to describe how the Tau-Buhid pay respect to the place. On the next slide, however, I was confronted with a problem, like how about beyond biological beings? In many indigenous communities like the Tau-Buhid, these beings are not abstract in the sense that they carry with them manifestations as landscape, bodies of water, rare species, and many other things that are not seen ordinarily but are often conjured in rituals. In the words of Marisol de la Cadena, they are earth beings. In UPLB, do we have earth beings? What stories do you attribute a specific tree? Fertility tree, for example. The fertility tree is standing there in the sunken. It's a freedom park only as a tree, but it gains agency that we attributed to it. So, in a sense, it is also conscious of it being the fertility tree. Thus, to me, a multi-species paradigm is not enough because each being in the world is conceived based on the narrative by which their conditions for becoming are used to allow their existence. Let me give you an example. For example, for the conservationists in Mounts Iglit-Baco Natural Park, a warty pig is warty pig because of its taxonomical position in the order of life. But for the Tau-Buhid, warty pigs exist based on the assigned condition for their existence. The condition is that they should be spirits. Thus, in the article, you will find me using, in quotation marks, the term animal forming spirits. In other words, beings that exist in stories of indigenous and local communities are not mythical or ordinary, but rather real beings with accompanying cultural attributes. These cultural attributes could provide insights about their political struggle, their collective fear, aspirations, and plan for the future. Let's go back to the fertility tree. What stories do you attribute when you see the fertility tree? How did it gain such reputation and such story? And anyone who could discuss what a fertility tree is would also establish an identity as someone coming from UPLB, because most of us know where the fertility tree is and how did it become the fertility tree. In a sense, through a multi-species ontological paradigm, the one which I am proposing, We may be able to grasp the covert aspects of a community's life, which in pure natural science paradigm alone might be overlooked. So this is a challenge to our human ecology and forestry scholars, especially social forestry, if they have representatives here. For example, can we ask, what grassroots realities surround a species we try to study? Like, can we conceive of the virus which brought the COVID-19 not only as a biological agent, but as a cultural species, bringing insights about how sometime in human history, such a virus accumulated so much agency by feeding on our collective struggle, inequalities in the access of basic services, personal problems, emotions, and even faith, how through such conditions for existence, it created what many of us would say the new normal as the present social order. The virus, therefore, isn't just a virus, but it has its own disposition. Well, students and colleagues, do you have pets or companion animals, like cats and dogs? Do you see them as biological beings alone? What about starting to see them as coexisting beings, as companion species? We actually share with them our stories. They sniff us or meow at us to communicate that we are sharing one existence in a different world. Or what about the pests in the house? Don't they tell about our personal anger about something? Our irritation to an ant creeping on our plate, or a mouse that tried to chew your vehicle's electrical wiring? I know you have many more examples in mind. So you see, my proposal in the next slide, multi-species ontology, reaffirms an ancient view about existence, that everything is connected. No wonder that the Tau-Buhid maintained their cultural practices despite the new order brought about by state activities in their frontier, all because they understand that humans are not a central species in the world, that humans could also be a subject of the wrath of nature or could benefit from other species. In the literature, multi-species ontology follows the intellectual project of Mario Blaser and Marisol de la Cadena, which espouses an ontological term or a proposal for a world of many worlds, a pluriverse. What does this mean? Well, do you still remember how the UPLB community gathered at a funeral of a tree? The tree we named Lolo Kapok. Lolo Kapok's biological identity exists in the world of plants and trees. Yet UPLB did not see the tree only as an organic matter, but one with agency or someone with a plan for its own life. When it died, we pronounced so many eulogies in honor of the tree's memory. Our eulogies reflect so much about us humans, but also reflect our ways of grasping a distant world of plants in a way that we treated the kapok tree as a being. Thus, our eulogy for the kapok tree, which makes it a being, resonates from the way indigenous and local communities assign agency to non-humans like the pigs as the backdrop of the Tau-Buhid story. To be clear, perceiving non-human being is not a matter of respect. We always say respect cultural differences, things like those. Respect at times places one at a higher ground and thus presupposes the other as inferior. Respect dismisses indigenous people's concern as a matter of cultural difference rather than an ontological conflict, taken from Lassalle. Perceiving beyond humans as beings is about tolerance. May I suggest tolerance is when we simply allow others to be. In the case of the Tau-Buhid and many other indigenous communities, it is a challenge to governments to allow off-grid communities exercise their right to isolation. Personally, reflexively, I would say that tolerance is when we allow others to exist according to their disposition in our organization while efficiently working towards collective progress. Its antithesis like control, dominance, intrusiveness, and violence should be deemed obsolete in a world that is ever connecting with other worlds. Overall, my attempt at articulating multi-species ontology in my article is aimed at helping us acknowledge not only the diversity of beings around us and far beyond us, but as well as recognizing their ability for disposition in the interconnectedness of life. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Christian Rosales. At this point of our program, may we request again Dr. Rosales to come on stage. We will now proceed to the questions, to your questions. So we will now proceed to our open forum. Sure, Rhea. Alright, for our open forum, please formally introduce yourself and your affiliation or your unit or your course, and then ask your question. We have a microphone over there, and please feel free to come forward. Dahil kung hindi po kayo magtatanong ay meron po akong itatanong. I am actually floored or wowed by the presentation of Dr. Rosales. Thank you very much for your sharing. Parang ang dami pong points of reflection doon sa kanyang pagbabahagi sa araw na ito mula sa title, mula sa topic, mula sa participants, sa pamamaraan ng pagkalap ng datos, at sa pagdidiscuss po ng kanyang mga findings. So, saan po ba tayo magsisimula? Pwede po magsimula po sa inyo. Kasi meron po akong tanong yun. Pwede namang mamaya na. Mga estudyante natin na nag-aaral po or nag-thesis, Opo, oo. So, marami po tayo matututunan or yes, kung tayo po ay bibigyan natin ng ating sarili ng pagkakataon na makausap po ang ating awardee na si Dr. Rosales ngayon, paano niya ba ito ginawa? Ano ba ang kanyang mga challenges? Pagpatuloy po natin ang ating no? Oh. Teacher Reyes, please introduce yourself and your unit, your course.
Hello. On a pleasant day, I'm Ricardo Lisa Bader Jr. from PSHE or Human Ecology. So my question is, according to the guide, as cited by Bernard, he said that identity is the sense of who we are. So with that said, I would like to ask if how does the Tau-Buhid community identify themselves in accordance to their ritual hunting? So yun po. Like kung paano po nila ina-identify yung sarili nila. In accordance sa puso nila sa pigs and also sa ritual hunting na nakasabi nyo sa article. So thank you po.
Thank you very much for that question. Actually, it's a question that requires answering. It requires another forum maybe because it boils down to the question of ethnicity, the question of identity. Okay, in the Tau-Buhid, that's why if you notice in the article and in my lecture, I always say highland Tau-Buhid because there are also lowland Tau-Buhid. So meaning to say there is a polarity among the group itself. And so the question, how do they identify themselves? Is a question, right? So ritual hunting is actually a reaffirmation every year of who they are. For example, among the highland Tau-Buhid, they have what they call original culture. Kultura, they always say kultura. It's not their word actually, it's an exonym. In Palawan, you can also hear that, okay? Yung original culture or kultura. So what does it mean to be a Tau-Buhid? Highland Tau-Buhid. To them, it's possessing an original culture. So clothing, for example, in the article you'll find two men, one with the clothes, the t-shirt, the other one has no t-shirt. The one with the t-shirt only observes what is happening but cannot join in the ritual hunting because he does not possess anymore the original culture. So which means to say only that for the highland Tau-Buhid, the ancestors' traditions should be maintained in order for one to become a Tau-Buhid, in a sense, the highland Tau-Buhid. And what is that? In my ethnographic work, I found out that no highland Tau-Buhid is not without any knowledge about sorcery. So sorcery or magic is a very important knowledge for them. Again, not only spiritually, but as a kind of ethical regulation on how to deal with other members. So the question is, how do they identify? They identify on the basis of how much they could practice what was left by the ancestors to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Christian. So, any more questions for Sir Christian? From the faculty? Ayan.
Actually, sir, my question is not about the lecture, no? So while I was listening to you, nakita ko yung passion, eh. So ang gusto kong tanong, para sa mga estudyante natin, paano nagsimula yung passion mo?
Okay. Well, to tell you, I was a former seminarian sa Claret. You know Claret, right? Okay, St. Anthony Mary Claret. Our mission area was in Mindanao, and we were also engaged with the indigenous peoples in Mindanao. And I saw there how the indigenous communities are marginally represented in the mainstream like this. So I told myself that if ever I would be a missionary, which I did not become, as you know, because I'm here, okay? I'm wearing this rather than the stola. It should be, sabi ko kay Sir RD, parang stola itong suot ko, okay? So it should be stola, but it's like this. But because, you know, the universe has a plan for me. And so I think it starts where I started. That's being a seminarian. We were introduced to many marginal communities, and I chose to work on the indigenous peoples. Not to mention also my passion for things that are different. I like to be different. I want things that are different because to me, they speak of something which is deeply much a source of many other information about our being human in a world which is terribly homogeneously human. There is no heterogeneity, and so we have to start acknowledging diversities like this. So my interest is basically from my formation years as a seminarian before. But now, no, I'm not a seminarian anymore. I'm not religious person anymore, but spiritual in a sense. Because we were called, when we take the vows, we would be called religious, okay? But now, religious in another aspect of religiosity. So that is my interest.
Thank you, sir. Teacher Rhea, would you like to ask her a question or a question from our students?
Well, I would just like to comment on what he said, no? Kasi paano daw nagsimula yung kanyang passion. So, kailangan maging, kumbaga, yung karanasan mo ay diverse din, no? So, lumabas siya sa kanyang comfort zone. Yung bahay siguro, bahay o bahay opisina. So, balit, lumawak ang kanyang pananaw dahil sa kakaibang karanasan na pinili niya rin, no, na puntahan or danasin. So maraming salamat po sa mga ganon. Siguro ay pwede rin natin i-try, pwede ba tayo mag-risk ng ganon? Pwede ba tayong Oo. Yan. So yung diversity, embracing diversity. Sir, kasi ang question ko kanina, minamention mo yung tungkol sa sciences being confined in the 5 senses, no? Yun yung reality. Pero sinasabi mo kanina na meron palang specific realities that are also sensible even if it is beyond the five senses.
Yes.
But what can be confined in the five senses as defined by the big S is what prevails in society. It is what prevails in our laws, in our policies, and all, no? In our standards of behavior. So, ngayon, sinasabi mo through your award-winning research na merong ibang realidad o merong ibang siyensya na pwedeng sabihin science in the peripheries. Pero kailangan bang manatili siya sa peripheries? So, paano po kaya natin maisusulong yung iyong pinresent ngayon na there is something beyond the five senses that can also be or should also be acknowledged?
Okay. Well, that's a challenging question, but it boils down, to me, it boils down to the question of epistemology, knowledge construction, and what can be considered as knowledge. In Western science, we always see knowledge as something that is universal, free from any kind of adulteration. Any kinds of results should be replicated, or else there is a hocus pocus in that. But among indigenous communities, indigenous knowledge in particular is knowledge for as long as one can experience it subjectively. So, knowledge for indigenous peoples is subjective rather than objective. And why is it like this? It is subjective because in its subjectivity, we can find community order. For example, even if you know one particular magic, but that magic is known by an elder, the elder's magic is much more superior than one you possess, on the premise that the elder has so much experience than you do. So in other words, any knowledge in terms of planting, in terms of hunting, and many other things in seed and cultivation will always require experience. But actually, there's many problems with regards to incorporating indigenous knowledge to mainstream sciences. In conservation, they started to do that, like identifying the indigenous names of different species in the environment so that there could be a more culture-sensitive approach to conservation, something like this. But it also poses many threats and problems to indigenous knowledge, like indigenous knowledge that are being patented by many companies. In other words, it cannot be used anymore by the indigenous communities who possess that because it's already patented. So we have to be very careful, I think, Teacher Rhea, in our pursuit to incorporate indigenous knowledge to the mainstream. What I would suggest, however, is to understand that, again, there are many worlds. And the world of the Western science is, to me, one world that speaks about reality in relation to other more worlds out there which speaks about reality. So, it's challenging.
So I guess we're gonna have more conversations after this, Sir Christian. All right. So I guess yes, you have a question now.
Hello po, sir. Good afternoon. I am Jerome Pang-Agham from the College of Development Communication and the Educational Committee Head ng Haring Ibon UPLB. And I would like to appreciate po when you mentioned, especially sa part ng inyong study, regarding sa flaws ng ating environment and conservation laws, na hindi siya medyo cultural sensitive because dumadating tayo sa point na regarding sa protection ng wildlife and biodiversity, nahihirapan tayo kung what is illegal, especially for our indigenous communities. Diba? Kasi this is part ng kanilang lifestyle noon. So hindi mo masisisi na they continue to hunt, kunwari mga bats, the flying foxes, the tamara, hindi lang naman siya for meat, for ritual purposes, and others. So yun po, gusto ko lang pong i-elaborate since na-mention niyo po yung Wildlife Conservation Protection Act sa isa sa mga nakitang flaws. So, gusto ko lang elaborate doon kung ano po yung nakita niyo certain issues in regards to the experiences you have with the Tau-Buhid.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. The problem is basically the lack of consultation with the communities. It's as if we are entering in the community, in an indigenous or local community, as someone with expertise, specialists on matters like that, the law or whatever, but without any consultation. Why in the very first place we are entering into their community? So what is this consultation? Actually, the IPRA is asking that we need to consult the indigenous communities before we go there and before we implement our science-based projects. But it's not happening, and there are many political agenda why it is not happening. And one is the process of securing the free, prior, and informed consent. It's a tedious process actually, but I want it to be tedious that way because it would help indigenous communities understand the impact, the implication of a certain project before they would accept it in their community. So again, the flaws of the law that we have is consultation itself. It is patterned to some kind of ancient colonial order without understanding that we are a different nation composed of many other quote-unquote nations, that we have to understand that we can only move forward protecting our environment, for example, if we would subscribe to the wisdom of our indigenous communities, like yun nga, indigenous knowledge systems through consultation. But today, ginagawa na yan, may mga participatory research, for example, that are being done. So I'm not saying that there is nothing is being done by the government or the state. Actually, we are learning from our mistakes and we are doing our best to bridge the gap in each world so that we would live a collective future, like ensuring that the wildlife are still there despite the decimation of their population.
Alright, thank you, Sir Christian. Sir, I have a question. My question is, how do the hunting practices of the Tau-Buhid reflect their spiritual beliefs and relationship with the spirit world? And how does this connect to the broader concept of human-environment interaction in human ecology?
Okay, it's a good question, but again, I would have to answer that in a very long manner, but I will cut myself, okay? So, how do they do that? I think the very existence of one particular element in the Tau-Buhid life would speak a lot about how they reorganize their ecology, and that is fire. In the territories of fire, in other words, you'll see there how fire is very important to the Tau-Buhid and to other indigenous communities, that they deliberately use fire in order to politically establish their ownership of the land. They delineate it. Okay, so if the government would say, no more ignition practices because they are destroying the environment, the emission, and so on and so forth. Indigenous peoples do ignition politically and as well as because they want to sustain their indigenous knowledge system through the use of fire. For example, in that article, I call it territories of fire because any kind of activity, from rituals even to the delivery of birth delivery, fire is always present. So the Tau-Buhid, not only they are spiritual, quote-unquote magic-oriented people, but they are conscious politically on how they could protect and delineate their property, their land, from outsiders who are encroaching upon their communities in the name, again, of legality and science. You see, so when we talk of, this beginning today, especially our students, when we think of indigenous peoples, do not think of them as backward people. You are wrong. You have to think of them as capable of complex thinking like we do. And in fact, in the case of the Tau-Buhid, being different, being other, yung sense of authority is again power to them, because that's when they can manipulate, maneuver political responses from outside to their advantage, like putting the forest in terms of fire. Thank you.
Yes, there are questions. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, Dr. Christian, and congratulations. Very
Thank you,
good
ma'am.
presentation. My question is about our, what do you call this, our desire now in PSSC. We're very conscious that our researchers should go through an ethics review. So I'd like to know if you went through that process, if you had to go to the dreaded National Commission on Indigenous People. Did you have to go through having your research pass through an ethics review committee?
I would say that I would admit to you, okay, I do not know the implication of my admission to you, that I did not go with any other ethics board committee who would tell me what is ethical and what is not ethical. But what I did was, I consulted the Punong Tribo together with the Pang-Agham. The Pang-Agham are the elders. We discussed what we are going to do because they also participated in some areas of the research, which I acknowledge it also. They discussed it, and they discussed also the implication. For example, seldom you would find in the article chants or rituals that are used or participated and I witnessed, because we agreed verbally that there are aspects which I cannot show the public. The only thing I could show the public is their plight as an indigenous community, that this is their situation and they need more of tolerance in order to practice the right to isolation. So question is, did I do ethical, did I treat my work ethically in that matter? It's a question that will be there, here and there, everywhere, for all eternity. Perhaps 50 years from now, people will talk, oh, did he go with the ethics committee? Maybe he was not ethical, something like that. But thank you for your attendance today, and thank you for the question, ma'am, because it was clarified that the ethics committee, quote-unquote ethics committee, who granted me and who determined whether it's ethical for them or not is the Tau-Buhid community. If you read the article, you'll see there the highland Pupuana Butudaol, the one because in the highland there's another chief. There's an overall chief and there is another chief. I wish I could tell you everything we discussed about, but that's the only thing I can show to the public right now. Maybe in the next series of articles I'll be able to narrate more on that. But again, I would say, I'm clear, my conscience is clear, that it was ethically treated.
Thank you, Sir Christian. And we have one last question from the Dean of the College of Unity College.
Ito ay hindi pagsusuri kung tama ang iyong ginawa o hindi. Pero gusto kong hingi ng iyong suggestion. No? Dahil si Christian kasi ay ilang buwan pa lang sa College of Human Ecology. No? At siguro nasuri mo na ang ating curriculum. Ako ngayon ay nasa estado ng pag-aaral ng ating curriculum sa Human Ecology. Paano mo kaya mamungkahi na yung iyong mga pag-aaral ay pwede nating mailahok sa ating pag-develop pa o pagpaunlad pa ng ating Human Ecology?
Thank you very much, Dean Sandalo. Well, I would like to connect whatever I have right now, that skills and some sort of expertise in the matter also, with the established office here at UPLB, which is the Office for Institutional Development in Higher Education. Actually, UPLB is beginning to understand the importance of quote-unquote non-mainstream knowledge and skills through micro-credentialing. So for example, when we go to the community, perhaps if someone did not have a college degree and did not know how to conduct research, so perhaps we can teach one on how to do that through a micro-credentialing manner. How do we sense it? What questions to ask? For example, How do we ask certain questions? What guards do we have to put in order to determine what is ethical and what is not ethical? So I think it should be in connection and collaboration with the OIDE. But my service as your faculty, I'm always available and I will really help. I'm interested in that, especially on the move of human ecology to open its science for accommodating indigenous knowledge and systems and practices. Thank you.
Alright, maraming salamat po, Dr. Rosales. Congratulations. At